Taylor, who will be talking about developing pedagogical content via Smarter Balanced Assessments. Sounds interesting. But over the past 12 years, Megan has taught 6th to 12th grade mathematics in Daly City, San Mateo, my old town, Redwood City, Santa Clara, and is a nationally board-certified mathematics teacher. Her research programs focus on how secondary mathematics teachers interact with their curricula, specifically when, why, and how they adapt. What, to students? No. To textbook materials. You're supposed to give me a little hint there. She believes improving public mathematics education in the U.S. hinges, not binges, on improving teacher education, and she works in academic and professional development settings to this end. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. So, like Paul said, I work here at Sonoma State University. My name is Megan Taylor. I am a colleague of Jessica Parker's, and I focus on people helping people become mathematics teachers, and I work with mathematics teachers in our schools. And this title is really a lot of rhetoric if you haven't heard these terms before, so I'm going to define some of these things. But basically, we're talking about how because all the assessments are changing in wild ways, high-stakes testing is changing in wild ways. What does that mean for what's happening in schools? And specifically, what does that mean for what teachers are doing with technology and the kinds of knowledge that they need to have about how to address these very different assessments? So the questions that I'm going to address today. One is, how is the role of technology in high-stakes testing changing with the transition to this new set of standards? And then, okay, what do these changes mean for the role of technologies in classroom teaching and in terms of what teachers need to know and be able to do? And here comes the definitions here, and these are kind of small, but this term pedagogical content knowledge, often referred to as PCK, is really the blend of pedagogical knowledge, which is knowing something about how to teach well, independent of subject, and content knowledge, which is knowing your subject, in this case, mathematics. So pedagogical content knowledge for mathematics is knowing how to teach math, which is a very different thing than knowing how to teach science or knowing how to teach Minecraft or something else. And technological pedagogical content knowledge, often referred to as TPAC, is PCK, specific to a technology-enhanced learning environment. And all of our classrooms can now and should be considered technology-enhanced learning environments, not only because of the new testing that's happening, but because we should be using technology fluidly in our classrooms and defining the word technology much more broadly. The other thing that I'll say is there's this term high-leverage teaching practices. That's educational rhetoric for just good teaching. And so that's all I'm going to say about that. Wiggins and McTighe, these guys are, this was from a White report recently, they're big assessment and backwards planning people. They're very prestigious in the educational community, and they said recently, we already do this as a frequent reaction to the new standards. In fact, they contain significant departures from existing curriculum with the ultimate aim of preparing all students for college and career success. Merely trying to retrofit the standards to typical teaching and testing practices will undermine the effort. And there's kind of two big changes here. There's changes in testing, and thus there's changes in what needs to be happening in classrooms. And the more aligned those two things are, the better and more students are going to learn. So dealing with this first question of how is the role of technology changing, and this is something you might know nothing too very much about. This is the trajectory right now of the Smarter Balanced Assessments. The Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium is responsible for the testing that's going to take place in California. They're the ones designing the new tests. And right now we're at a place where schools are deciding whether or not to pilot the new tests this spring, and official testing is going to start in 2015. And one of the most important things about this test that I can tell you is that it was reverse engineered to assess what it means to be college and work ready. That's a very different goal than the goals of our testing previously. What do we want our university students to know and be able to do? What do we want our employees to know and be able to do? And the focus now is on factors related to college and work readiness and not necessarily on content. It's using content as basically a tool to assess college and work readiness. That's a very different look at how testing has been in our country forever. All of the SBAC assessments, with small exceptions, are computer-based and they're adaptive. So students are given new problems based on their previous responses. There's 4 types of questions: selected response, which is like the good old multiple choice that we know and love; constructed response; technology enhanced; and performance tasks. And I'll give you some examples of these in a minute. The performance tasks are based on some existing assessments that ramp up in difficulty. They allow students all theoretically access to the problem, and then they ramp up to kind of grade level content and go beyond that. And the goal of these, the design of these kinds of assessments, is for students to be able to show what they do know instead of what they don't know. That's a big change too in testing. The other really important thing about these new tests is that all of the testing is focused on reporting on 4 claims. These are the 4 claims for mathematics right now. So when a student gets a report from these tests, they're going to be told how much evidence was collected on their ability on these 4 claims. And if not enough evidence can be collected on one of those claims, then that's what the test will report. It'll say we could not collect evidence to say anything about this claim. No longer will students be told, you didn't know the Pythagorean theorem, your teacher is a terrible person, should be fired, which is basically the messages that we were getting before. And in California specifically, when these tests start, one of the things that teachers are, the reason why teachers are going to have to change what they're doing drastically is that our old high-stakes testing that was being given in the spring via No Child Left Behind was 100% multiple choice and 100% focused on content. And specifically in mathematics, it was focused on procedures, knowing how to use a formula, use an algorithm, drill and kill. Now these new tests are going to be at a minimum 60% performance tasks that are either open-ended or requiring students in some cases to use technology in really interesting and difficult ways. Let me give you some examples of those. Let me just go forward here for just a minute. Actually, I'm not going to switch my order around because I forgot how many slides I have in the middle there. So one thing that I mentioned before is that right now there's a mismatch between these assessments and classroom work. And as Wiggins and McTighe said in their quote, teachers who think, oh, well, I can just kind of keep doing what I've been doing, it's not going to work anymore. Classroom work is going to need to completely change, and technology plays an intimate role in that. So for example, one of the new performance tasks addresses 16 content standards and 7 mathematical practice standards in one problem. That's very, very different from coming out of the age of multiple choice tests when one problem addressed one content standard. You move on. And if you think about college and career readiness, when we are problem solving in all of our jobs, we're pulling from a lot of different content, we're using a lot of different parts of our brain. That's now what these tests are trying to measure better. So classroom work really needs to be different. And one of the things that I always caution teachers about is that the new curricula, these publishers that have now come out with the Common Core aligned tests or textbooks, aren't really much help. This is an example of a Larson textbook as one example before Common Core and after. There's exactly 2 changes. One is that the chapter number is different on the right-hand side, and I'm going to move away from the microphone. They've listed the Common Core standard there. The actual content of the textbook, which is the most important thing that needs to change, is exactly the same. But they're Common Core ready. So the problem is these textbooks are sending the message to teachers that what they're doing is already fine, and everyone's going to do fine on the assessments if they just keep on holding down what they've been doing. So Conrad Wolfram, in a wonderful TED Talk that you should see if you haven't online, he talks about this question, what is math? And he defines it in terms of 4 steps: posing the right questions, getting from the real world situation to some mathematical formulation of it, doing some kind of computation, and then taking that math formulation and applying it back to the real world. And I'm sure we can all think of examples in our lives or our jobs where we do this work on some small or large level. And he says, now here's the crazy thing right now. In math education, we're spending about 80% of the time teaching people to do step 3, computation, by hand. Yet that's the one step computers can do better than any human after years of practice. Instead, we ought to be using computers to do step 3 and using the students to spend much more effort on learning how to do steps 1, 2, and 4. And though this also makes intuitive sense, this is reflective of what's happening with the new assessments. If we actually follow this advice, it's going to lead to students learning a lot more, being more college and work ready, and doing better on these high-stakes assessments. Let me show you some examples of some of these. I'm going to skip this one. Here's a released sample item from the new tests, which talks about developing a new prism. It gives you a prism down there with 3 measurements for the length, width, and height. And it asks you to create a new prism that has a given set of dimensions. And when you're actually in the sample test, you can go online to SBAC, and take this test. You actually can drag and drop prisms and build yourself a new prism, and there's a calculator on the side where you can calculate as you go. That's a very simple example of the kind of technology that's now embedded in the assessments that students are going to have to be familiar with. A little bit more advanced example is this is a performance task where students are given all of this information about a park that's going to be built, how much money they're going to have, that they need certain benches and lights and bathrooms. There's a ton of information to take into account. The first question that students deal with is which of these 3 construction companies should they use? Big open-ended question. After that, they kind of deal with what activities or what do they call them? What facilities should be included in the park? They give you data from the community on what people said in terms of how often they would use these different facilities. And then they actually give you access to a spreadsheet that's manipulatable where you can plug in different values of facilities and it recalculates money for you. It's doing that computation for you so you can focus on the problem solving. And finally, it gives you an applet where you can build the park with respect to what you're calculating in your spreadsheet. This is an assessment question that students are now going to get. If we continue to give students worksheets with problems 1 through 30, odd answers, back of the book, they're not going to be able to do this. So my job is to deal with this last question. What do teachers need to know and be able to do to maximize student learning in these technology-enhanced learning environments? And for the sake of time, I'll stop there. Any questions?
Good luck.
Yeah, right? Thank you.
Well, is there any hope?
Yes. Oh, yeah. There's lots of hope. Lots of hope.
So can I ask you this? I mean, this is one of the things that I think we're all facing in the K-12 California environment. Well, but here's the challenge. We've got $1.25 billion to implement Common Core and SBAC. I mean, that's what first came around in the first wave of money. Even when we implemented the last California state standards, there was almost $4 billion. How in the world are we going to do this with the funding sources that we have to really change the whole pedagogical approach of teachers, as well as provide the technology infrastructure and tools to do this?
Yeah, well, one not very positive reaction to that answer to that question is that what people are going to bomb these tests across the board. And specifically, students who used to do well, probably a lot of you in this room, people who did well on these multiple choice tests, people in affluent communities, they're not going to do well on these tests either. And there's going to be a huge surge of a lot of things in there. Some people are going to say, well, these tests are bogus and we shouldn't be using them because my A student didn't do well on them. But there's also hopefully going to be groups of people who say, wait, like this is based on what we really care about in terms of propelling our students forward. We need to put some more resources toward this. So I'm hopeful that more people will be mobilized in this category here. And after some of the assessment data starts coming out, it would be nice if it could happen before then. We'll go in a different direction.
In some cases, they'll blame the technology too.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the old bubble sheets.
Definitely.
But those are all. I think it is the right way to go. It's just it's going to be a tough sell.
It's going to be, yeah.
We can take some more time, so if you want to elaborate a little bit, go right ahead.
Or I mean, another question.
I think it's the same issue. Is the challenge is going to be not. Wolfram's right. That's the new model. That's what we should be. That's where we should have been 50 years ago. But how do you prevent the political backlash? Because we already see charter schools forming, in objection to the federal mandated Common Core standards. Some of the leaders are in Sonoma County.
Yeah. I mean, I think in all of that is so there's a lot of little positive things that are happening that could be really big. For example, the SAT is being redesigned. One of the reasons why the SAT is totally redesigning its test is because it now has competition in the new SBAC assessments. The old California standards test they didn't see as competition. They knew those were bad tests. SAT had status. But now the SAT is going to be compared with results on a test that actually shows college and career readiness, theoretically. So the SAT doesn't look very good anymore compared to that, theoretically. I'm going to emphasize that word. So the SAT is revising that. I think that's powerful in and of itself because the parents at the end of the day who have a lot of control over things in our country are going to still want their kids to go to college. And the SAT and SBAC, if they're really designed with the kinds of things that we want for students learning, then there's going to be power behind that too.
Second question, and then I'll the challenge, I'm in K-12, I understand that the world pretty well. You're at the university level, that kind of argument you just made has to come from the universities. The universities have to be the voice that say, this is the kind of student that will do well in our society and our universities. The K-12 will be in exactly that pinch that you just described.
I agree.
Well, we'll take the SAT because my kid did well on that test.
I agree.
So, okay.
So at the university, I think
Please do.
What are some of the movements afoot to try and revisit whole teacher education, teacher credentialing, teacher certifications, all of to address this? How is that? I mean, obviously your MOOC model are changing some of that, but it's big stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that we face is that the teachers that are coming in our credential program right now they've been taught the old way. And they did well. So especially math teachers that I worked with, they went into math majors. And now they're becoming math teachers because they know how to explain things well and they like kids. Unfortunately, only that latter one is relevant anymore. And so there's some cognitive dissonance there. There's definitely kind of breaking them down a little bit and trying to help them understand that this new way is the right way to go. Do you want to say something about that?
I think you talk about co-teaching as well and shifting our own model within the credential program. But I mean, as you might expect, not all of our colleagues are excited about change as well within the credential program.
Yeah.
So there's ways that the young folks that
we're the junior faculty who are here at Scenic.
are trying to change it. But it's a great question.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
This may be way too big a question, but especially to sneak in at the very end. But one of the things I always think about, speaking as one of those kids that always tested well when I was a kid, is that a lot of the big issues about how career and college ready you are is how well you perform work with others. But so many of these tests have to do with individual abilities. You are the only person in the room. You're not allowed to make eye contact with another person. Do you foresee any means of building how to measure how well a kid works with other kids in these testing?
Yeah, well, so interesting that you'll bring that up. So with the performance tasks, almost all of them have in-class components that are group work based. They're not assessed on that for reasons of validity, and I think that we're not at a point yet where we're going to accept that we're going to assess group work in public school settings. But I think it's an amazing step in the right direction that that's even a part of the new assessments at all. So for example, that performance task has a pre-session where students are working in groups in class facilitated by the teacher, and they're gathering data and talking about ideas. And then the next day they get to kind of play with the spreadsheet on their own. So that's, I think, wonderful. And I mean, we certainly advocate the power of group work in our classrooms. Kids should be working together. They should be using technology together. Yeah.
Well,
thank you
very much. Very spirited discussion.